Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 drama. Max Verstappen this season has broken the all-time record for most Formula 1 wins in a season, with breaking that record up to 14. But George Russell has downplayed this achievement somewhat, saying that Hamilton would already have this record potentially multiple times over if he had a weaker teammate back when he was driving, implying that Perez can't quite put up the challenge to Verstappen than some would maybe like to indicate. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. Some further comments here on the sprint races, because this weekend we've got another sprint race, and as he describes, it's only really the people out of position that move forward. You put a tyre on that lasts the whole stint, not much happens, saying it's not really a race, doesn't like the sprint races. Norris, I believe, has also echoed a similar opinion, but yes, apparently we're going to 6 sprints next season rather than just 3. This season, of course, we had one back in Imola, we had one in Austria, and then we've had one, well, coming up here in Brazil. There are some extra points on the line. It's interesting as a bit of a novelty to watch, but I don't think it's particularly entertaining. If it was made that you had to make a mandatory pit stop, I don't know how it would be done, but if you had to go soft or something, I don't know, in a mandatory pit stop in the sprints, that would make things more entertaining, but they're probably not going to do that, not sure. Verstappen doesn't like them though, can't really blame him. Often it's just about staying out of trouble, because if you have an instant in the sprint race, like, you're not going to go for any sort of risky maneuver, because if it goes wrong for you, you find yourself out of the race, you start at the back of the grill on Sunday, and your entire weekend is ruined. Verstappen though has been getting a lot of praise, and I think understandably so. Probably this season to some degree has been underrated. I think it happens really when there's a dominant win in what turns out to be a pretty dominant car. Verstappen and Hamilton both, and even Schumacher and other drivers back in the day, maybe don't get the credit they quite deserve for their performances. And Christian Horner is obviously going to gas up his own driver, saying that this, he reckons, is maybe the most dominant ever Formula 1 drivers campaign, which is quite the statement. Probably not fully true, but still, it's Horner, right? He's going to say it. I think I can understand it. He obviously has broken the record, so you've got to give him some credit. Also has the record now, Verstappen, for most points ever scored in a season. There's been years of domination with Mercedes, but as an individual driver, probably yes, he says. And this kind of leans into the point that George Russell is getting at here in a second, that if Verstappen had a teammate on his level, someone that was, toe-to-toe with him, that could compete with him, then the numbers would be different, and the season might be even more dominant for Red Bull, but not quite so dominant for Verstappen. That's a question that is being raised right now. It's understandable, right, that Red Bull go down this route, but it still raises some questions. We saw back, of course, after, well, it was Austin, where he tied the record in Mexico, where he broke the record for now 14 wins out of 20 races. Yes, the percentage isn't quite as high yet as Schumacher's performance back in 2004, and I'm pretty sure he can't break the all-time record, because I forget exactly when it was, but it was maybe even in the 50s, when there was 8 races and one driver won 6 of the 8 races. So I think that's still the record that Verstappen can't break in terms of a percentage win rate, but still not too far off. He can, of course, win 16 races potentially this season, which is absurd. And yes, there are far more races now than there used to be. Schumacher in 2004, there were only 18 races there at the time. This year there's 22, so it was only a matter of time, I think, until someone was going to break this record, but it was Verstappen who've done so in pretty dominant fashion this season, thanks to Code F1 for this beautiful graphic here, with Verstappen already breaking the record for the number of points scored in a season, 416, practically double Sainz and Hamilton if you look at the numbers here, so kind of crazy stuff, but already here's some records that he has taken away. Now, George Russell has given some thoughts on this. He said, congratulations, well done Verstappen for breaking the race win record, and Verstappen himself, he's obviously happy with it, but he wasn't saying, wow, this is such a best achievement of all time, because he knows full well that there's more races nowadays. It was probably going to happen at some point. Russell gave an interesting comment though, looking back to previous seasons, saying, well, if Hamilton had a different teammate back in, let's say, 2014, 2016, for example, when Rosberg was putting up a great fight, then who knows, maybe Hamilton would have won every race in the season. Of course, winning every race is, rather challenging, but, he makes a fair point that out of all the races there, if Hamilton had a teammate that wasn't so competitive as Nico Rosberg was, then maybe there was a chance that Hamilton wins more races and still holds the record potentially for race wins in a season. And also this is kind of, I wouldn't say it's thinly veiled exactly, but, to some degree he's talking about Perez here, right? Because he's saying that, well, look, Perez can't compete with Verstappen at all, so that's why Verstappen has the record. Of course, Verstappen deserves credit, but at the same time, it depends on the teammate as to how many wins you can have in the same car, which I suppose is a fair point, but it's nonetheless an interesting one. So as Russell goes on to say here, we know how strong Max is. Red Bull did a really good job, but you've seen it in the past with teams that are so dominant. When you look back at Lewis and Nico, they won pretty much every single race in those seasons. If Lewis had a different teammate in that era, maybe he would have won every race like Max is doing now. So pretty much saying that, if Lewis had a Perez, right, or maybe if Lewis had a Bottas, let's just say, for some of the later seasons, then maybe he would have won every race like Max is currently doing. Max is doing an excellent job of giving them some credit, hoping they can close the gap. But still, some interesting comments I thought nonetheless here. And we can actually look back at the history of this, because these are the 2014 race results, just about fitting on screen for you guys. Kind of small, but you guys can see probably Mercedes here in the picture. This is 2014, where they had the dominant car. It was a bit of an unreliable car, and there were plenty of incidents between these two guys, but Mercedes' car was so quick that they could kind of handle the beef and the strife and the drama between the drivers, because, you know, they knew that they were still going to win the constructors anyway, pretty much regardless of what happened on track. Rosberg, probably a bit of an underrated driver, to be honest, incredibly competitive with Hamilton during these kind of, well, this era, let's say, and this is 2014. Riccardo won 3 races that season in the Red Bull. Every other race was won by Mercedes. There were some technical gremlins and stuff that were being dealt with here. There's also 2015, slightly different season. Hamilton won the championship this year as he did in 2014. Mercedes won a lot of races in a row here. Ferrari were there and thereabouts. Vettel got a couple of wins. It was Rosberg towards the end. Then 2016, that kind of famous season. Verstappen, of course, winning in Spain. There was Riccardo here in Malaysia, but every other race was also won by Mercedes, right? A lot of Hamiltons, a lot of Rosbergs, and Hamilton won 4 to the end of the season. Wasn't enough, though, to overturn the deficit that he had at that point to Rosberg. But, I mean, looking back at this particular season, if there was no Rosberg, and yes, there were, you know, Hamilton made mistakes, and there was technical issues that he had with the car, but if he had a teammate that wasn't as competitive as Rosberg, would Hamilton have won effectively all of these races? You know, not exactly. There's other circumstances, and the races don't exactly go that way, but there were a lot of 1-2s here, where Rosberg would come out on top and Hamilton was right behind him. Certainly 2014, that was usually the case when both cars finished the race and Rosberg won a race. And of course, this season there were a fair few races as well. So look, a season like 2016, if he had a different teammate, then maybe Hamilton would have the record for the most race wins in a season. Of course, that's not really how history works, but it's an interesting point. And kind of since then, to some degree, the teams, Red Bull and of course Mercedes as well, figured that the kind of Hamilton-Bottas partnership was more productive in that sense. Let's say we fast forward to 2020, for example. This is an interesting season because, of course, well, look, that W11 was an absolutely dominant car. There was a couple of races where it wasn't the quickest car, and at the end of the season, they were kind of preparing stuff for the next year. And this season had very few races as well due to the pandemic, of course. And Bottas got 2 race wins here this season, but this is an argument really to say that, well, if it was this season, let's say this was a full season and Mercedes went all out for it, like Hamilton could have potentially had the record in a season like this if there had been more races with a teammate like Bottas that wasn't as competitive with Hamilton as Rosberg was. So interesting point. You've also got to wonder what this means for George, because George must be sitting there thinking, well, he obviously knows he's competitive with Hamilton. Of course, he is within good reason to gas up Hamilton as much as he can, because George is beating him in the championship, right, in terms of points. The last few races haven't really played out like that when you watch them, but the point standing is nonetheless the point standing. So Russell has pretty good reason to gas up Hamilton and say he's the best ever and all this type of stuff, because it makes him look better. It's kind of the classic Rosberg strat as well from a few years ago. But yeah, do you agree with this one? Like, is he really taking shots here at Perez? Because I think he is to a certain extent, but it's also kind of just the way this sport goes nowadays with the number 1, number 2 driver. Mercedes don't really have that because, look, they're building for the future in Russell. But when Hamilton retires in a couple of years and Russell is presumably their number 1 man, who will their second guy be? Will they have another kind of Rosberg-Hamilton situation, or will they go for a more Verstappen-Perez arrangement where, you know, it's not said outright, but there's kind of a clear number 1 guy, and then the support driver as Perez can turn into when required, as we saw in Abu Dhabi 2021. And even Bottas mentioned himself that it was super hard seeing himself within that ecosystem at Mercedes, and he was like because he couldn't beat Hamilton, he was really going hard on himself. It was just tough to deal with that from like a mental perspective, and obviously he didn't get quite the same love within the team as Hamilton did, and I'm sure it must have been really difficult for himself, and also, you know, just feeling within that team environment. And Perez might feel at times the same way, but he obviously has got a couple of wins this season, which is great to see. But Verstappen on pure pace has pretty much dominated him since the first couple of rounds of the season, where the car maybe didn't suit him so well. So into your thoughts on that one in the comment section below. Will Verstappen get to 16 as well? Because as it stands, he's certainly odds-on favourite to do exactly that. And a quick note here on the next up, right, because there is some guys in the academy for the Red Bull side in their kind of Formula 2 structure, Alpha Tauri, of course, as well. They're trying to find still the next Perez, I guess, because at some point they'll move on from Perez. He's got a new deal for a couple of years. Verstappen's going to be their guy effectively until he retires, I imagine, or until he wants to do something else. They're looking at Liam Lawson from F2. They're looking at some other drivers as well. Ayumi Iwasa, I think is his name, has made some standout performances as well as of late. But yeah, obviously they're looking for the Perez replacement down the line effectively. Do they go for another Perez route where the guy is clearly designed to be second fiddle? And in fairness, look, they brought Gasly in, they brought Albon in, and they couldn't deliver alongside Verstappen. It's a tough seat to step into, there is no doubt. And the way way that Red Bull have their car set up to be super front-end heavy and, figure out the rear end when you get to the end of the corner, the exit of the corner. Like, that's the way Verstappen likes to drive the cars. The other drivers that they've put with him can't really deal with that in the same way. But obviously, the combination they have is a very successful one, as we've seen this season, for winning both championships, as they have indeed done. So enjoy your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments section below. And just to mention this before we close out here, because, just interesting pole statistics here. Lewis Hamilton, most poles without winning the title, 12 in 2016. Senna holds the record for 13 in 1989. Rosberg with 11 in 2014. Such was the dominance of those two Mercedes guys at the time. And even Charles Leclerc has now joined the ranks here, season ongoing, with 9 poles without winning the championship this season. So just thought it was an interesting statistic to mention. But very much enjoyed your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you are new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.